Hey y'all, Patrick James.
Jon Double Tap Britain.
And we are getting into the fray today with Prudence Indeed. Jon?
Oh,
who's Prudence?
I don't know. Let's find out.
Let's dig into who Prudence is and why Prudence is so important. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation upon such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness.
Now, where have I heard that before?
That would be the Declaration of Independence.
And, you know, that's a portion of the Declaration of Independence that's been quoted a lot here recently.
Absolutely.
By people who are ready to burn down our government.
Throw it off.
Start it over.
Throw it off.
But, you know, there's more to that line.
Well, there is. And well, there should be.
You know, it goes on to say, Prudence Indeed.
Now we know where prudence came from.
Will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed.
Key words there. Key words. Important words. Because although we the people, as was shown when we initially declared this declaration and sent it over to King George, we defined a right to throw off a government and create a new.
Now, before we get too far into that, you know, prudence is not exactly a part of the modern lexicon.
Well,
so, for those non-boomers out there, we might ought to provide a little context and a little definition.
You can purvey that information.
So, prudence, from the root word prudent, which means acting with or showing care and thought for the future.
Yep.
Prudence is the quality of being prudent. And in short, it's cautiousness.
Cautious. Yep.
A cautiousness with a view towards the future and the repercussions and the ramifications and what happens next.
Now, we know that Jefferson was the creator. He wasn't the only influence.
The little C creator, not the big C creator.
Yes. Of this document. He was the majority creator, but not the full creator.
No.
And he was very eloquent with his words. So when he said prudence indeed, there was a comma after prudence and one after indeed.
Prudence, pause.
Indeed,
pause.
Which meant that was the emphasis.
Cautiousness.
Extreme cautiousness. Because although the people have the right to throw off their government, they also have to institute a new one.
And
that's the whole
that's
premise behind
that's the part that, you know, modern day anarchists and, you know, you could say insurrectionists, people who want to run them all out on a rail, tar and feather them, burn it all down and let's start over. They don't get into and then what?
Well, and make no mistake, there are anarcho-capitalists out there who believe it is possible to throw off the government and not have one. I don't know how that's exactly possible, except that everybody would have to understand natural rights and thus natural law.
You know, now that you mention that, another quote comes to mind, and it ironically includes the word prudence as well. Let me see.
Yeah, that's a long one though, but
Well, we'll take this a piece at a time.
okay.
Thomas Paine,
Yep.
common sense,
Yep.
definitely not as common as it used to be.
Well, and let's face it, that was a very, very large impetus to this. So just so you know how significant Thomas Paine was in furthering this.
You know, in the part of the Declaration that we read, you know, it talks about establishing new forms of government.
Yep.
And Thomas Paine said, society in every state is a blessing. Now, I just want to pause there because for the longest time, I didn't quite grasp that. And what he's saying is that people living and working together, that's a society.
Yep.
That interconnected, working together little ecosystem is always good because people are communal people. We don't do well individually on our own without interaction with others.
No.
But society in every state is a blessing, but government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil. A line we use all the time.
Yes.
Because every time we start talking about the government, people look to the government as a savior, and we look to the government as a necessary evil.
Yep.
You know, in its worst state, it's an intolerable one.
Yes.
Again, going back to the Declaration, suffer evils as long as they're sufferable.
Yep.
Now, a government which we might expect in a country without government... Oh, sorry.
Or exposed
Yeah.
to the same miseries by a government.
That we might expect in a country without government. So, without government, he's saying that people will take advantage of each other.
Absolutely.
With a government...
Human nature.
With a government, he's saying that we will take advantage of each other through the government.
Yep.
And he says our calamity is heightened by reflecting that we furnish the means by which we suffer.
Yep.
We pay for the government that is inflicting the suffering upon us.
Absolutely.
A lot of people could probably relate to that right now.
Yep.
But he goes on to say government itself, like dress, you know, after the Garden of Eden, is a badge of lost innocence. The palaces of kings are built upon the ruins of the bowers of paradise.
And see, I know that this type of language isn't spoken anymore. And that those that don't look back and read the words of history can sometimes be lost in their words. They're boring.
You know, and the whole anarchist mindset, basically, we could be free of government and live just fine. Paine is addressing right here. And in that, if we suffer evils from government that we could expect without government, we're not really getting anywhere, are we?
And this is where he says it.
Oh, go ahead.
For were the impulses of conscience clear, uniform and irresistibly obeyed, man would need no other lawgiver.
And that goes to an anarcho-capitalist principle called the non-aggression principle.
The non-aggression principle. It also lends itself into the voluntarism.
So if everybody was a saint,
Yep.
then yeah, we could probably live without government.
Yep.
But that not being the case, he goes on to say, we find it necessary to surrender up a part of our property to furnish means for the protection of the rest. And what he's saying there is, you pay your dues to form a government, you have to give up some of your property, give up some tax dollars, whatever, to provide for a common defense, common protection, rule of law, the enforcement of that law, things of that nature. And this he is induced to do by the same prudence. Prudence got around back then.
Yep.
In other words, to do by the same cautiousness that he approaches everything in every other case. Out of two evils, to choose the least.
Out of two evils, to choose the least, which is what we do every time we vote.
The lesser of two evils.
You can say, oh, I don't like having to vote the lesser of two evils. Anytime you vote for a politician, you are voting the lesser of two evils. Because government is always going to be evil.
There was only ever one
Necessary.
perfect man, and he's not running for any offices that I'm aware of.
Exactly.
And that's the point. Government, necessary evil. Without government, you still have the evil. It's just not, you're not paying for it directly. It's just coming at you willy-nilly.
Exactly.
But good government is a different story.
Good government is good.
It's-
Bad government is bad.
And that's what he said. Wherefore, security being the true design and end of government. In other words, security of the people as a whole. It unanswerably follows that whatever form thereof appears most likely to ensure it to us, with the least expense and the greatest benefit, is preferable to all others. So you do have to give up a little something, everybody collectively, in order to form a government.
Absolutely.
The consent of the governed gives it its power, and then you got to keep it small. You got to keep it limited. You got to keep it in check, which is what the founders tried to do. Because after they declared their independence, they knew what they wanted to do next.
They had a plan. And so now we come down to, like one of our videos, the Declaration of Insurrection or Independence.
Defenders of independence.
Yes. So are we insurrectionists or are we defenders of independence? This is where it comes down to, do we throw off our government and form anew? And do you trust anybody to create a more perfect form of government? And I get it. There's a lot of history in our country.
And just before we get, and there's a lot of people already there, burn it down, start over.
Yeah, it's time.
But when you go back and look at our history, Thomas Jefferson made it quite clear that's not what happened back then.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't just decide one day that they were going to start stacking bodies because, you know, them loyalists, they'll never come around.
Right.
They didn't just decide one day that they're going to go run all the redcoats out on a rail. What they did was, after a long train of abuses,
Yep.
with the ultimate goal to despotism, as it says in the Declaration of Independence. So they suffered the evils as long as they were sufferable.
Yep.
Until those evils showed up at their doorstep, wanting to take their money, wanting to take their guns, wanting to quarter troops in their houses, take their women, their crops, and
Take the women.
and that is where they drew the line.
They drew the line, and they were requested a request by Richard Henry Lee to create, wasn't it Richard Henry Lee? Yes, it was. Nah. Oh, I hate this because I had my thoughts, and I'm sorry, folks. But they were instructed to create a declaration by Richard Henry Lee. My bad. See, so I was right. I'm sorry. And on June 7th, 1776, he instructed the Committee of Five, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Ben Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston, which a lot of people don't even know those last two. You'd have to do some looking into it because obviously they didn't really make the history books all that much. But he instructed them to create a Declaration of Independence. And they did. And the American people, the colonies, saw it on July 2nd, and Congress officially adopted it on the 4th. So, they created a document that I consider probably to be one of the most perfectly penned documents in our creation, because it truly talked about the natural rights of the people.
But, Thomas Jefferson also said that, this was not, a lot of people put it as revolutionary, but he said, these are not new principles.
No.
In a letter to Henry Lee in May of 1825, talking about the Declaration of Independence, he said his goal was not to find out new principles or new arguments never before thought of, but to place before mankind the common sense of the subject. It was intended to be an expression of the American mind. I'm going to stop right there for a second. Not some Americans, the American mind, the mindset of the American colonies. And to give to that expression the proper tone and spirit called for by the occasion.
Yep.
Now, and there was part of that got cut out, but he also said something about how the people were discussing these things in conversations, in letters, in pamphlets. So this was a thought that was very diversely spread throughout the colonies. That's why he referred to it as the American mind. It wasn't a few people that said, I'm about sick of this. I've had enough. Enough is enough. No. This thought, this revolutionary thought, had spread far and wide through the colonies. Hearts and minds. Something we've preached from day one. If you're not winning the hearts and minds, you've lost the revolution before the first shot's fired.
Yep. Now, there are, the history books show it, that it wasn't a unanimous decision. Okay, it's presented to be a unanimous decision, but it wasn't, because Pennsylvania and South Carolina voted against it. Delaware was completely divided, and New York abstained. So that's 4 of the 13. But that's a majority.
Yep.
And in this case, the majority ruled. And as we dig into history, we find that the majority is going to rule. That's just the way it is. Even though we're sovereigns and we all have a voice, as we found many times over, the majority will rule.
And that goes right back to Paine in his society in every state is a blessing.
Yep.
Society can only exist with a common will of the people.
Absolutely.
It
will only exist with that.
You go to any big city where 2 gangs are fighting over territory, that's not exactly a blessing. So there has to be some common mindset, or at least common goals, in order for society to even exist.
Now, there is question as to, did we create a new government? So did we actually create a new government?
No.
Not technically, we didn't.
Nope. Now, there was a thing back in the day where England, Britain, the Crown had gotten lax on their enforcement of the regulations, and in so doing gave the colonies some room to breathe and start to self-govern. And it was that taste of freedom that set the stage for everything to come. Now, it's also the mustard seed that grew into the Liberty Patriot movement and ended up in the Declaration.
Yep.
Now, the Declaration itself didn't form a government.
No.
It simply said, we're no longer part of your government.
Yep. And the Declaration, and why I feel that it's so important, is because it does define natural rights.
Mm-hmm.
It defines why. And it defines how.
Yeah, it wasn't a declaration of war either.
No.
It was a declaration of independence. It was King George who said, "No, I don't think so. So we're going to come force you back in," and that didn't end well.
And see, this is the point: are we insurrectionists? Were our founders insurrectionists?
No.
No.
Did they take the fight to King George? No. They just said, "Okay, you're over there. We're over here. Don't cross this line."
Yep. We're not going to recognize you as a ruler over America, the United States of America.
But again, going back to the prudence, they didn't do that just on a lark.
Nope.
They had, well, of course, they had local governments and state or colonial governments in place.
And constitutions or proclamations, articles of those colonial states.
So once they declared their independence, it wasn't like a free-for-all.
Nope.
They had already institutions in place to continue governance.
Yep.
And then they did the Articles of Confederation. That didn't work out so well. And then they did the Constitution.
Yep.
And then, well, the Articles of Confederation didn't so much create a government as it did unite 13 individual governments.
Right.
Kind of EU style. But the Constitution actually created a federal government.
Yep.
And then the Bill of Rights protected the rights of the people in the states. So they were already 3 steps ahead of where we're going before they declared their independence.
They knew where we were going. They had already highlighted and bullet pointed what they were going to do. It took them some time to get there.
And, historians differ. Some say that, they had about a support of about a third of the population. Mm-hmm. Some say it's up 40, 60%. Mm-hmm. But the point is, they had significant support before the first shots came, before the Declaration, before the Articles of Confederation, before the shot heard around the world. They had the will of the people, or at least the hearts and minds of a significant majority of the people.
Now the question you have to ask yourself: did they create the most perfect form of governance the world has ever seen?
Well, it did result in a very prosperous superpower.
It did. It has certainly been an enduring country that represented sovereign rights and protected those sovereign rights for the most part. But are our rights slowly being eroded?
Well, some of those rights were kind of slow in coming.
Yeah.
Women and minorities especially. But yes, as our government has gotten bigger, more bloated, more intrusive, more controlling, the 2 things most often used to infringe on people's liberties are public health and public safety. That's why after terrorism, 9/11, Patriot Act, before 9/11, people could walk into the Capitol like they did without problem.
I mean, they might have had a little bit of problem if you were storming in and streaming in willy-nilly.
But the People's House was much more accessible.
Absolutely.
Pre 9/11.
Yep.
Post 9/11, the barriers started getting moved out.
Yep.
They
were creating a buffer.
And it's actually very symbolic of what's happening with the government and the people.
Absolutely.
The government is pushing the people farther away from the government, so they have less control because they don't have access.
They're creating elitism.
Elitist oligarchy.
Yes.
So now you have these bloated government officials, these bloated government programs, these people who are willing to dole out the freebies for your vote. But yet, when you object to something that they're doing, or try to object to something they're doing, or try to get a redress of your grievances, well, you kind of got to go through, you got to get a permit, you know, and there's certain, you got to provide your own security, yada, yada, yada. It's not supposed to be that way.
But you know what? Life isn't perfect. And evil exists in the heart of man. And man, throughout history, has subjugated other weaker men to do their bidding. It's just the way it's always been. And it is likely to always be. I don't know what it is that we can do to change that, except bring it all down to a much smaller perspective in your state.
Right.
Where our founders intended for us to be able to control our government.
You know, there was we did a video on the Electoral College. And one of the things we talked about in that video was when Madison was trying to decide how to handle the presidential vote and just voting in general, he had a quandary. You know, their small government that they created didn't really do much for the average person. It was mainly meant to deal with landowners, businesses, you know, interstate disputes, and foreign policy. You know, so if it doesn't affect the general population, why should you give the general population the right to vote? Because they don't really have any skin in the game. You know, they're neither break my leg or pick my pocket. You know, but over time, obviously, things began to change. You know, they gave the states the power to decide how they run their elections, and initially the states only allowed landowners to vote. So because they had skin in the game, the general population didn't. And here's where we all get caught up in the trap. As government grows, it starts touching more and more of our lives.
We give up more and more of our freedoms.
You know, then along comes the income tax, and now everybody is touched by the government because everybody is paying into it.
Well, supposedly.
Well, yeah. So if you're paying into it, by God, you better have a damn say in it, right?
You got skin in the game. You got money in the game. You should be.
But ironically, that same growth has pushed the people away from the government, away from involvement, away from being engaged and informed about what their government's doing on their behalf.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're busy. They're busy making a living. They're busy trying to support their families. They're busy trying to gain more properties, more money. They're busy. Well, maybe you're too busy to monitor your own freedoms and liberties.
Eternal vigilance. Where have I heard that?
Because, you know what? If we fail to control our government, how can you expect to be free? How can you expect to be happy? Popular control of government alone distinguishes liberty from slavery, taxation from robbery, and just government from tyranny and oppression. Period.
Popular control of government. The people in control of government. The founders called the Constitution a parchment barrier. It's words on paper. We the people were the enforcement. We gave it the teeth. And there's a bunch of you out there gumming right now.
And I don't know why.
Let me...
There's a lot of reasons.
I just insulted a lot of people, so let me apologize. There's a lot of people out there gumming right now. I get it. You're busy. You got to keep that fantasy football going, you know.
And those aren't the only reasons. Yes, there are some that are those reasons. But there are some that Call of Duty is more important.
We have a lot of distractions in the modern world.
Absolutely.
We have a lot of conveniences in the modern world.
This is a huge distraction. TV is a huge distraction. And why do you think those huge distractions exist?
To keep your eye off the ball.
To distract us. That's why they exist.
It's why the Romans built the Colosseums and they had the gladiators.
And you know what? Technology is a great thing. Hey, we're here giving you our perspective. You're there watching it, we hope, and waiting with bated breath on every word we say. Yeah, I know that's not the case, but I could only hope that that would be the case, and that you would share it, and that you would rumble us when it's on Rumble, that you would promote us on YouTube and like and subscribe, because that is how perspectives like ours are heard. And if you believe that we're speaking truths, that's what needs to happen, because that's how grassroots movements grow.
And that's how you achieve what Jefferson called the American mind.
Exactly.
You know, you have, and it's not just enough to follow other people. And we've talked about this before. You can't expect other people to do it.
No.
Now, obviously, some people are better at speaking than others. I'm having a hard time speaking right now myself. But, so that may not be your strong suit. You may be.
You might be a numbers guy.
Or you might be a letter writer.
You might be a leader who can't speak to the crowd, but you know what to do.
You can organize.
It takes the sum of all our parts. It has to take the sum of all our parts, because not one person is going to be all those parts. There's only one who can be all those parts, and that is my master, Christ. Jesus Christ is the sum of all those parts. But for us, we have to be the sum of all our parts. And we have to be firing on the same cylinders. And if we're not, it won't work. So what does that look like?
And if we're not practicing prudence, then if we're not looking to the future, if we're not thinking about what's next, if somebody's out there advocating for insurrection or anarchy or whatever, and they can't tell you what's next, then you probably listening to the wrong people. Our what's next has always been, we talk to you, we educate you as best we can, we try to motivate you as best we can, and we try to advocate and get you to advocate as well.
At your state levels.
Or just to your coworkers, neighbors, family, friends.
Tell them what your perspectives are. Maybe you don't iterate them. You don't speak as eloquently as some people, and I'm not the best speaker either. But I'm trying the best I can. John's trying the best that he can to present a perspective that you need to look at.
And even if it just makes you think, if you share it with somebody else and it makes them think.
And you dig.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't come in here every time we sit down to do a video and say, okay, we got the answers, this.
No, we have to research them too.
Yeah, we have to research, we have to study, we do a lot of reading.
You see us reading from a script at times because we do go off topic quite frequently, as we're doing right now.
Yeah. But the point is, you have to be involved. You can't depend on somebody else to do it. You know, I think everybody's dad, at least in my generation, said if you want something done right, you do it yourself. Mm-hmm. And that is what America was built on.
Absolutely. And you know what? I've heard so many times, well, you know what? If your friends jumped off that bridge, should you just follow them? We can look at that in the complete context of even the protests yesterday. If everybody else was running in,
well, depending on when you see this video, the protest was January 6th.
All right. Yes. That was yesterday for us, but this probably won't come out till tomorrow or the next day. So, yes, on the 6th, they went into the Capitol, and people went in behind them. I don't know who went in first. It's likely that it was people who were professionally used to doing those type of things.
Agent provocateur.
Yeah, we can talk about that. But the reality is, we all those that wanted liberty and freedom to ring true were hoping that those last-ditch efforts were going to pan out.
They didn't.
But I'm going to tell you right now, it was the will of the people in the states that didn't vote the way you wanted them to vote that were certified. And I'm calling you out, Pennsylvania and Georgia and Michigan and Wisconsin, Arizona, and the other states that may have even fallen into more question. The reality is, you have to do your job in your states. You have to. And that is convincing your representatives of what you want.
And that's using prudence.
Yeah. The majority's going to rule here.
I mean, it's easy to follow a charismatic leader. It's easy to follow the mob. That's why they have the term mob mentality, because people acting in a large group tend to be less inhibited and tend to do things usually that they probably shouldn't or wouldn't on their own. So you have to use prudence. You have to be cautious in your approach to how we fix our government. If you're a burn it down type, you better know what happens after.
Yeah.
If you're a fix it at the polls type, you better know your elections are not rigged. They're transparent. They're free and fair. It's always, we're a very instant gratification type country these days.
Yeah.
DoorDash, Uber, Amazon Next Day Prime. Government doesn't work that way. Government was never meant to work that way. It's supposed to be slow and methodical. It's supposed to have passion in the House, for example, tempered by the Senate to cool those passions. And those are the things that our founders put into our creation, because when they declared their independence, they had a vision of where they wanted to go. And like Thomas Jefferson said, it wasn't based on new principles or new ideas. It was actually age-old principles and ideas encapsulated in a new package.
New approach.
A new approach. I mean, republicanism goes back to the Romans and the Greeks.
Yeah.
So there's nothing new under the sun. So this was nothing new, but it was packaged based on the American mind, where people were at that time and what they wanted once they declared their independence. And it was a pretty widespread mindset.
And remember, when they were doing these things, it was not unanimous. It was a majority rule.
Which is why when they created the Constitution, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists
fought.
They didn't compromise. They distilled it down to those things where they agreed.
Yep.
So, okay, you don't like this, you don't like that, that's out. You okay with this? You okay with this? Okay, that's in. You have to distill it down to the basics, where we all agree, where we all can find common ground.
That's why the wording of the Bill of Rights.
Yep.
I mean, come on, it's not perfect in its wording. It's not defined specifically. It was compromised upon, but it was supposedly in stone that these would be protected for us from infringement by our government. But only so long as you could control the government. Are you controlling your government? Are you being represented? Is the majority in your corner? If it's not, then we've got a lot of work to do.
And if you're waiting for the next Messiah president, you're wrong.
So what's the takeaways? The takeaways is we gained in the House. How far are we on inequality in the House?
5 to 7 seats, I think.
We're tied in the Senate. It means we've got a lot of work to do in the next 2 years.
But you got to fix the elections in your state first.
So guess what? This is just our perspectives. We appreciate your time in watching it. We hope that you would follow along, share it, send us into the Rumble, swipe right, left. I don't even know what you have to do, because all I'm used to is looking and trying to relay my thoughts to you. We appreciate it. Please subscribe to YouTube, like us on our social media, and thanks. And know that if you want peace,
prepare for war.
Later, guys. Thanks a lot.